Don't open the top drawer. That's all her note said, written in red ink on a torn napkin, left on the kitchen counter beside an empty mug of chamomile tea she never finished. I wish I had listened. I stood there in the dim kitchen light, barefoot, trembling slightly, with the napkin between my fingers. Her tea was still warm. Her scent, that lavender vanilla stuff she sprayed on the couch, still hung in the air. But the drawer? It was open, wide open. And what I found inside has wrecked every version of reality I thought I understood. This wasn't one of those "I caught her texting another guy" situations. No lipstick on a collar. No hidden Tinder app. This was something worse. Something orchestrated. Inside the drawer was a single black notebook. Hardcover. Bound tightly. Unmarked, except for a sticker on the back. A little smiley face, which somehow made it feel even more sinister. I opened it. Page 1. October 6th, he believed me again. I almost laughed when he said, "I trust you." He's so damn sincere. It makes this game too easy. My throat dried up instantly. Page 2. October 12th, he thinks I'm out with Maya. I'm not. I told Marlon to park 3 blocks away. The keys under the planter. I left the lamp on in the study, so it looks like I'm home early if he checks the cameras. I kept flipping, my hands shaking harder now. Page 5. October 28th. He made my favorite pasta and lit candles. I let him. Then I went to the bathroom and messaged D to say I'd be out in 30. He sent a picture. I smiled while I flushed. By page 9, I was numb. November 4th. If he ever finds out, I wonder if he'd scream. Or if he'd just vanish. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a diary. This wasn't even a confession. This was a blueprint. A timeline. A strategy. A detailed record of lies, excuses, locations, backup excuses, alibis. Even coded entries I couldn't decipher. She wasn't cheating. She was operating. I closed the notebook. Sat down. Stared at the drawer. And then I noticed something taped under the inside of the drawer. A folded piece of paper. I pulled it off. It was another note. This one in pencil. If you open this, then you finally stopped being the man I married. You finally became the man I feared you might become. I left that night. Didn't leave a message. Didn't pack a bag. Just walked out and drove until I ran out of gas 2 counties over. I thought it was over. I wanted it to be over. Because what kind of woman keeps a journal of deceit and then leaves a trap behind to test if you'll find it? But 3 days later, she came back. And with her came a truth that flipped everything I thought I knew about our life and about myself. I didn't go home. I didn't check my phone. I didn't call anyone. I spent the night in a rundown roadside motel with flickering lights and a front desk that smelled like burned popcorn and bleach. I couldn't sleep. Not after what I'd read. Not after seeing my wife's handwriting describe our marriage like it was a stage play, and I was the underpaid background actor too dim to realize the scene had changed. I kept rereading that last line she left in pencil. You finally stopped being the man I married. It didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like she wanted me to find it. Like she was counting on it. Like the whole thing was scripted and I'd just reached the next act. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I had taken the notebook with me, and for the first time, I noticed something strange. The margins on every right-hand page had these tiny slashes. Some single, some grouped, some circled, and a few entries had no writing at all, just a date, a blank page, and a margin mark. I flipped to one of the blank pages and held it under the hotel lamp. Something faint caught the light, pressure marks from writing that had been erased. I shaded the paper with the side of a pencil. A message appeared. Ask for Tyler. Say you're Wallace. What? Tyler? Who was Tyler? That's when I noticed the corresponding date, October 19th. That was the same day I thought she was visiting her sick aunt in Bakersfield. She even sent me photos from the hospital, a selfie in a surgical mask, and one of her aunt asleep with a drip in her arm. But now I knew those pictures weren't hers. The lamp in the background wasn't a hospital light. It was one of those modern minimalist ones from our own guest room. The entry for October 19th wasn't blank after all. It was encoded. I didn't want to follow the trail. I really didn't. But I couldn't go back to my old life now. Not after this. I drove back to the city that night. But not home. I went to the address written on a dry cleaning receipt I'd found tucked in the notebook, folded like a placeholder. It was for a shop called Monarch Tailoring on the east side. I walked in, holding the receipt like an idiot, and said, I'm Wallace. I'm here for Tyler. The man behind the counter didn't even blink. He reached beneath the register, pulled out a small white envelope, and handed it to me without a word. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, and it made my knees buckle. It was me asleep, in my own bed, taken from the angle of the hallway door, dated October 19th. Behind me, in the photo, barely visible in the mirror, was Leanne, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, smiling at the camera, holding up 2 fingers, like a peace sign, or a countdown. There was something scribbled on the back. One day, you'll understand why I had to do this. But not yet. That was when I realized this wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a puzzle, and I had already stepped onto the board. She wanted me to follow her moves. She wanted me to chase the truth, and I wasn't ready for how deep it went. Because when I finally went home, 2 nights later, she was there. Not angry, not scared, sitting calmly on the couch, legs crossed, like she'd been waiting for a guest to arrive. She looked up and said, "You found the photo?" I nodded. I was too numb to speak. Then she said it. 5 words that flipped everything sideways. "He's not who you think." I asked her who. She leaned forward, looked me dead in the eyes, and whispered, "Marlon isn't real." When she said those words, "Marlon isn't real," my first thought was that she was mocking me, trying to twist the knife deeper. After all, I had seen his name in her messages. I had stared at his texts. I had read the late-night devil emoji. And I had even convinced myself that he was the flesh-and-blood man who had taken my wife away from me. But the way she said it, her voice low and measured, with none of the defensive panic of someone caught red-handed, it didn't sound like denial. It sounded like she was about to unravel something much darker, something that would explain the journal, the photos, and the sick game she'd been playing. And for the first time in 9 years, I was afraid to hear my wife speak. I asked her what she meant, but she only gave me that small, tight smile, the one she used when she wanted to say "you'll see." She slid the black notebook across the coffee table toward me, as if I hadn't already read it cover to cover. I told her I didn't need to look again. She insisted. I flipped to the same pages I had tortured myself with, the ones that documented her lies in brutal detail, and this time she pointed at the margin marks I had noticed but ignored in my panic. She tapped the little slashes, the ones grouped in 2s and 3s, and whispered, "It's not what you think. They're not marks. They're coordinates." I wanted to laugh. Coordinates? Like we were suddenly living in some spy novel? But she wasn't joking. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded city map. Who even uses those anymore? And she began circling spots across town, matching each one with the margin marks in her book. There were dozens of them. Coffee shops, bookstores, back alleys, even a storage facility on the industrial edge of town. Every place had a date next to it, like a schedule, a ritual. I didn't understand what any of it had to do with me, until she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I've been leaving pieces for you. You weren't supposed to find the drawer yet, but now that you have, you can't stop here." I demanded to know what she was talking about, why she had been meeting with some phantom named Marlon, why she had humiliated me with lies and left a trail of breadcrumbs like this was all just an elaborate test. She grew quiet, then leaned closer and said something I will never forget. "Because the only way to keep you alive was to make you think you were losing me." My stomach dropped. Alive? What did that even mean? Was this supposed to be some metaphor, or had I just stumbled into something much worse than an affair? I thought she was losing her mind. I told her she needed help, that this whole "Marlon isn't real" excuse was pathetic. But then she opened the envelope I'd brought back from the dry cleaner, the one with the Polaroid of me sleeping. She held it up and asked if I'd noticed the reflection properly. I told her I had. I'd seen her in the background. She shook her head slowly, her eyes filling with tears, and whispered, "Look again. It isn't me." I snatched the photo from her and stared at it under the lamp. And that's when my heart nearly stopped. She was right. It wasn't her face smiling in the reflection at all. The hoodie, the posture, yes, but the face? It was blurred, like it had been altered, or like the instant film couldn't fully capture it. It wasn't my wife's smile. It was someone else's. Someone who looked like her, but not quite. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as she went on, explaining that she had created Marlon as a cover, as something for me to find and hate, so I would never stumble onto the real truth too soon. The diary, the texts, the alibis, she said they were bait. And if she hadn't staged it all, I might have already been gone. When I asked her what she meant by gone, Her voice cracked. Because they're watching us, Wallace. They always have been. And the moment you stop believing it's just an affair, that's when they take you. I sat there in silence, holding the Polaroid with trembling fingers, trying to process whether my wife was the most brilliant liar I'd ever known or the only person who actually knew what was happening to us. And the worst part was, in that moment, I believed her. I hated her for breaking me, but I believed her. And that's when the phone on the table buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. From Marlon. Stop talking. He knows too much. My first reaction was to throw the phone. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just flung it across the room like it had teeth. It shattered against the wall, and for a moment, there was silence. The kind that sinks into your bones. My wife, or the person I thought was my wife, didn't move. She just stared at the fragments, her hands folded in her lap, like this was all expected. Like she knew I'd break. Like she was waiting for it. She didn't reach for the pieces. She didn't even flinch. She simply looked at me with those unreadable eyes and said, "Now you have to decide. Do you want the rest of the truth or not?" Her voice wasn't panicked. It wasn't pleading. It was exhausted. Like she'd been holding something in for far too long, and she wasn't sure she could carry it anymore unless I helped her lift it. I sat down. My legs were numb. My throat hurt from saying nothing. The message still pulsed in my mind. Stop talking. He knows too much. It was chilling not because of what it said, but because of what it assumed. That someone out there was watching us in real time. That this wasn't just about cheating or secrets or emotional distance. It was something else. Something constructed. Orchestrated. I asked her again, flat out, what she meant when she said Marlon wasn't real. She sighed, picked up the journal again, and opened it to a page I hadn't seen before. It was taped shut. She peeled it open with her thumbnail, slow and careful, like unsealing something sacred. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white, like it was taken from an old surveillance camera. It was a picture of me, alone, sitting at a diner I didn't remember visiting. Dated 6 weeks ago, 3:42 a.m. I asked where the hell she got that photo. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "You don't remember that night, do you?" Of course I didn't. 6 weeks ago I was, what? Working late? Editing reports? Sleeping poorly? Sure, but nothing like this. I didn't remember sitting in any diner. I didn't even recognize the furniture, the angles, the walls. But there I was, plain as day, slouched forward in the booth, looking half dead. And in the mirror behind me, there it was again. That face. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't wrong exactly. It was like someone had recreated her face from memory and gotten 90% of it right. Like an uncanny wax figure. A dead giveaway only if you knew her the way I did. The smirk was too wide. The jaw just slightly too narrow. And the eyes weren't hers. They were too alert. Too focused. Not kind. Not calculating. Just observing. "Who is that?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign coming out of my mouth. "That's not you, right?" She looked away. That was answer enough. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh. Because suddenly, it all connected. The drawer. The fake diary. The mistakes she made while lying. Too obvious to be real. The cough that woke me. The unmissable signs she wanted me to find. She was never trying to fool me. She was trying to pull me in. But for what? Then she finally said the words. "You're not the first version of you, Wallace." That sentence sat in the room like a loaded gun. What the hell does that mean? I asked, standing up, backing away from her like she'd grown claws. She reached out, not to grab me, but to steady herself, like saying it had drained something from her. I asked again, louder this time, "What does that mean?" "You've been reset. Twice. They call it pruning. You start to notice things, inconsistencies, gaps. You ask the wrong questions, go looking in drawers you're not meant to open, and then it happens. A rewrite. Quiet. Surgical. Like it never even happened." I thought she was insane. I wanted her to be insane. Because the alternative, that someone or something had been altering my memory, my history, my identity, whenever I got too close to the truth, was something no amount of therapy could fix. But she wasn't finished. She said the first time I was reset, I forgot her entirely. Came home one day and called her Maya. She thought it was a joke. Then I locked myself in the bathroom for 6 hours and didn't speak to her for a week. She tried to pretend it didn't happen, until it did again. The second time, she said I lost 2 days. Thought we were still in April when it was already June. She wrote it all down. Dates, signs, things she saw shift behind my eyes. She said she played along, started making mistakes on purpose to see what I'd notice. And then she created Marlin to test the system, to bait whoever or whatever was pulling the strings. But now that I had found the drawer too early, they were watching again. I told her she was delusional, that this was some twisted way of avoiding the truth, that she'd betrayed me, emotionally, mentally, maybe physically, and was trying to wash it away with some sci-fi fantasy. But I was lying to myself, because in my chest, I knew something was wrong with my life. And I had known it long before that drawer ever opened. Then she said one last thing before standing up and walking out the door. If I don't come back in 3 days, check the mirror in the guest room. Not the one you see, the one behind it. I stood in the middle of the living room, jaw clenched, fists trembling, surrounded by broken glass, photographs I didn't remember taking, and a version of myself I no longer recognized. And I realized something horrifying. I didn't know what day it was. I sat on the couch for what felt like an hour, maybe 2. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I barely blinked. My ears were ringing, like I had just come out of a car crash and was waiting to see if I was still alive. The silence was loud. The walls felt unfamiliar. Even the way the shadows moved across the floor felt wrong, like I had slipped 1 inch sideways from the real world and landed in some counterfeit version of my own home. But the worst part was what I couldn't explain. I truly, honestly, didn't know what day it was. That had never happened to me before. I wasn't a heavy drinker. I wasn't on meds. I didn't have some rare neurological condition. I was a routine guy. I brushed my teeth at 7:15. I microwaved my coffee for exactly 33 seconds. I kept a calendar on my fridge with those dumb motivational post-it notes that Leanne used to tease me about. But that night, as I walked to the fridge to check the date, I realized something horrifying. The calendar was missing. Just gone. No magnets. No post-its. No trace it had ever been there. The fridge looked sterile, like it had been swapped out for a new one while I was asleep. I opened the freezer. It was empty. That part broke me, because I knew I had frozen ravioli in there. I remembered buying it 2 nights ago at the corner store. I remembered the cashier's chipped tooth and how he talked about the rain. I remembered placing it on the 3rd shelf, right next to the half-empty pint of mint chocolate chip. But now, no ravioli. No ice cream. Not even frost. I began tearing through the apartment. Closets. Drawers. Every cupboard and shelf. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was just looking for proof that I had existed here. That my life was still mine. And then, in the back of the bedroom closet, I found something that didn't belong. A black duffel bag. No tag. No brand. Inside, for neatly folded shirts I had never worn, $200 bills in a sealed envelope, a prepaid phone I didn't recognize, and a small pocket notebook with only 1 line written inside. If you're reading this, they missed something. I stared at the sentence until my hands began to shake. It wasn't just the words, it was the handwriting. It was mine. My heart started pounding. I could hear it thumping in my ears, drowning out everything else. I flipped through the rest of the notebook, blank. Completely blank. Like I had meant to fill it with something, but ran out of time. Or maybe I had, and it had been erased. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment dimmed, just for a second, like the power had flickered. I froze. No storms outside. No outage warning. Just a brief pulse, a hiccup in the environment. When they came back on, everything looked the same, except the mirror in the hallway. It was fogged, which made no sense, because I hadn't showered. I hadn't even used hot water. And yet there it was, condensation, like someone had breathed on the glass. I walked up to it slowly. The hallway was narrow. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps like they were trying to warn me. I stood in front of the mirror and stared. My reflection stared back, but there was something off. The lighting? No. The background? No. It was my eyes. They weren't blinking at the same time. It was subtle, just a millisecond delay. But enough. Enough to make my spine go cold. I blinked deliberately, once. My reflection blinked slightly after. Not before. Not during. After. I stumbled back. My breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, that the stress, the sleep deprivation, the sheer psychological whiplash of the last few days had broken something inside me. But then I remembered what Leanne said. Check the mirror in the guest room. Not the one you see. The one behind it. I ran. Not calmly. I ran, like a child sprinting through a dark basement. The guest room door groaned when I shoved it open. The mirror above the dresser was old, framed in antique brass we picked up at a garage sale 3 years ago. I always hated that mirror. Something about its warped reflection. But now I looked at it with new eyes. Searching, scanning. And then I found it. A slight seam between the mirror's backing and the wall. I slid my fingers underneath and pulled. The mirror popped off the wall with surprising ease, revealing a narrow, square hole carved into the drywall. Inside it, taped to a wooden beam, was a single flash drive in a Ziploc bag, labeled with one word in black Sharpie. Reset. I didn't hesitate. I took it, grabbed my laptop, and locked myself in the bathroom. What was on that drive wasn't a document. It wasn't a video. It was a program, an executable file that began running the moment I clicked. My screen went black, then white, then black again. Then a series of time-stamped video files began playing, rapid fire, one after another, security footage, phone camera clips, screen recordings. All of them showing me, but not the me I remembered. One showed me yelling at Leanne, screaming things I swore I'd never say. Another showed me asleep in a hospital bed. Another, me walking into an office building I'd never seen before, shaking hands with people I didn't recognize. There was one where I stood at a podium in a gray suit, giving a speech to a crowd. I looked confident, controlled, smiling. But the last file was the worst. It was a recording of Leanne, crying, looking directly into the camera, saying something I'll never forget. If you've made it this far, I'm sorry. I tried everything to stop them, but I had to lose you to keep you alive. Please remember that. Please. The screen cut to static. Then silence. Then one final text prompt appeared in the center of the screen. Restore identity? Y/N. I didn't press anything, because I wasn't sure who I was anymore. And deep down, I was terrified of finding out. I didn't press Y. I didn't press N either. I just closed the laptop, gently, like I was afraid it might explode if I moved too fast. The screen went dark, but that single question still burned in my brain like a neon sign behind my eyelids. Restore identity? What identity? By that point, I wasn't even sure my name was Wallace. I mean, yes, people called me that. It was on my credit cards, on the framed diploma in the hallway, which, by the way, now had a different font than I remembered. But what did any of that prove? That I existed? Or that someone had told me I existed? I left the bathroom and wandered into the living room, dazed, lightheaded, like I had stood up too fast after hours underwater. Everything felt lighter. That was the strangest part. Not terrifying, not tragic, just empty, like all the emotional weight that had crushed me, the anger, the betrayal, the grief, had drained out of me and left behind something worse. Numbness. The apartment was still. Too still. The kind of stillness you only feel in places that have been recently rearranged. I noticed the painting above the couch was off-center, just slightly, maybe an inch. I fixed it. 3 minutes later, I turned around and it was off again. My phone was gone. The broken one vanished from the floor. No pieces, no glass, just an impossibly clean patch of wood where I'd thrown it. I should have left. I should have run, gotten in the car and driven until my tank ran dry. But I didn't. Because no matter how much I wanted to escape, a sick part of me needed to know what the hell I had done, or who had done it to me. So I went back to the duffel bag. I pulled everything out again, slower this time. The shirts, they weren't mine, but they were my size. One had a dry cleaner's tag pinned to the collar. W. Ingram. I blinked. That wasn't my last name. Not even close. I checked the envelope again. The cash was real, crisp, unmarked, but the bills were all printed in 2027. I checked the year on my laptop. I sat back against the wall. The air felt thinner. Time wasn't just slipping, it was folding. Then I remembered something Leanne said before she left. If I don't come back in 3 days. How many days had it been? I ran to the window. The light outside was dim, reddish, like the sky was stuck in permanent sunset. The street was empty. No cars. No birds. Not even wind. I opened the window and listened. Not even the faint hum of city life. It was like someone had paused the world. And that's when I saw it. A black SUV parked across the street. Engine off. No license plates. Windows tinted so dark they reflected back like mirrors. I stared at it for a long time, half convinced it would vanish if I blinked. It didn't. I closed the window and backed away. I knew what was happening. Not all of it. Not clearly, but enough. Leanne hadn't cheated. She hadn't lied. She'd staged it. the betrayal, the deception, to protect me. From them. From this. From whatever force or entity or agency had been pruning me, resetting me, feeding me a script, and watching to make sure I never looked behind the curtain. But I had looked, and now I couldn't unsee it. I opened the laptop again. I stared at the question. Restore identity? What if I said yes? Would it bring everything back? The lost time, the overwritten memories, the moments they'd cut and spliced like film? Would I remember who I was before the first reset? Or would it just bury me deeper, cover me in a new mask, another false timeline? I wasn't ready to answer, but I couldn't just sit there. So I picked up the prepaid phone from the duffel, powered it on, and waited. The screen flickered. One new message. No number. Just one word. Run. Before I could react, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps. Then silence. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. No one knocks like that. Not Leanne. Not neighbors. Not anyone who isn't trying to say, I know you're in there. I backed into the hallway, phone still in hand, eyes darting between the door and the guest room. I thought of the flash drive, the shadowy figure in the reflection, the files, the diner I didn't remember, the man I might have been, the version I might be again. Another knock. Then a voice, muffled, calm, chilling in its confidence. Wallace Ingram, open the door. It's time to come back. But that's not my name. Not anymore. And I wasn't opening anything. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even breathe the same. My pulse slowed. My mind raced. That voice outside the door hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened, hadn't even sounded particularly aggressive. But it knew my name, or the name that apparently used to be mine. And there was something in the way it said, come back, that felt too precise. Like it wasn't inviting me. It was activating me. I backed down the hallway, every step deliberate, my socked feet gliding over hardwood that now creaked like old bones. My head was a furnace of static and noise, but one thought burned louder than the rest. I have to disappear before they make me disappear. I ducked into the guest room, pulled the dresser in front of the door, and grabbed the duffel bag. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew I couldn't stay. Something had shifted in the atmosphere. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. Every corner, every photo frame, every crack in the paint, it all felt staged, repurposed, observed. Like I was inside a memory that had been preserved just long enough to manipulate me. I looked out the back window. The alley was clear. No SUV. No motion. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was orchestrated. I climbed down the fire escape, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. When I hit the pavement, I didn't look back. I ran. I kept moving for hours. Took side streets. Changed direction at random. I didn't use my cards. I didn't turn on the phone. I didn't speak to anyone. I just moved, like prey. By the time I finally stopped, it was almost sunrise. I was standing in front of a place I didn't even remember deciding to go. A building covered in graffiti and rusted metal shutters. Abandoned, or so I thought. And yet, the door was already open. A handwritten sign was taped to the glass. One word. Ren. I didn't know who or what that was, but the name sparked something in me. Not a memory, exactly. More like a shiver from a forgotten fever dream. Something from another life. Another version of me. Inside, the air was stale and bitter, like burnt coffee and paper. The place was once a factory, maybe a printing press. Machinery stripped. Dust in thick layers. But in the center of the room was a folding chair. And on that chair sat a woman. Not Leanne. Older. Pale. Hair buzzed short. Wearing a faded NASA t-shirt and combat boots. She looked at me and smiled like she'd been waiting for years. You finally made it, she said. Her voice was low and calm, but full of weight. They're slower this cycle. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but she raised her hand before I could open my mouth. We don't have time. Sit, breathe, and listen. I sat. Because what else could I do? She pulled a file from behind her chair and dropped it in my lap. Inside were photos, documents, surveillance logs. They were all about me, or him, or us, Wallace Ingram. That name, again and again. But with every entry, it felt less like mine. You're not Wallace Ingram, she said, like she could read the panic forming behind my eyes. He was a shell, a placeholder, someone they built when the real you started asking the wrong questions. I asked her who they were. She tilted her head. That's the wrong question again. She pointed at one of the photos. It was me, holding a woman I didn't recognize in front of a cabin I've never been to. I looked happy, whole. The caption said, June 3rd, 2023. Ren's cabin. Subject stabilized. You don't remember this, she continued, because that version of you started waking up. So they pruned him, pushed a patch update, slid in a new memory, your job, your marriage, the apartment, and let you reset. But each time you get closer, your mind starts leaking pieces of the truth. I didn't believe her. I couldn't. Because if I did, then nothing about my life, not Leanne, not the apartment, not even the heartbreak, was real. But the next thing she said cracked something deep inside me. You weren't supposed to love her. That was the error. I looked at her, stunned. What do you mean? She was supposed to guide you, monitor you, even mislead you, but not feel, and definitely not let you feel anything for her. That's why they kept resetting you. You chose her. You kept choosing her. Again and again. Even when your memory was wiped clean, you always found her. You always stayed. And that's when I remembered something. A sentence she once whispered in her sleep, weeks before any of this started. I had almost forgotten it. We keep finding each other, even when we're rewritten. I didn't understand it then. Now I did. Before I could speak, the woman handed me a small device, some kind of switch with a digital screen and a single button. Press this when you're ready to delete him. Delete who? I asked. She didn't answer. She just walked out, disappearing into the rusted maze of the building, leaving me alone with a file full of my own erasures and a switch that could destroy a man who might still be hiding somewhere inside me. And the worst part? A part of me wanted to press it, because maybe, just maybe, Wallace Ingram didn't deserve to survive. I didn't press the button. Not immediately. I stared at it for what felt like hours, sitting alone on the cold concrete floor of that gutted building while the sun bled through the broken windows like liquid gold. The device was small, unimposing. It barely weighed anything, and yet it felt heavier than the world. A part of me was still screaming, still trying to rationalize, still clinging to the idea that maybe this was all an elaborate hallucination, that maybe I'd finally snapped from the emotional strain, and this was my mind trying to patch the cracks. But the photos in the folder, the timestamps, the names, the entries, the memories that weren't memories but fragments of something real, they told a different story. A quiet, chilling truth. Wallace Ingram wasn't real. He was the version of me designed to forget. The soft one. The obedient one. The one who wouldn't ask too many questions. The one who believed in comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. But somehow, even through the resets, something real had broken through. Leanne. She wasn't part of the program. She had been inserted into it. Yes, as a handler, a monitor, maybe even a failsafe. But somewhere along the way, she stopped playing her role. She stepped off script. She began helping me, saving me, loving me. And I, despite everything, loved her back. Even when I thought she'd betrayed me. Even when I read her fake diary, saw the texts, believed the worst. Even when I walked away. Because deep in my bones, I think I knew. She was lying to everyone but me. I pressed the button. There was no sound. No flash. No sci-fi explosion. Just a click, subtle, soft, like the final period at the end of a long, tragic sentence. The screen on the device blinked once. Reset aborted. Subject unlocked. And then it went dark. I didn't feel different, not at first. No dramatic shift. No flood of memories. Just a slow unraveling. A quiet untangling. Like invisible wires were being pulled from behind my eyes. I remembered the cabin. I remembered the real job, not in finance, but in data engineering. Not in an office, but underground. I remembered being recruited, studied, trained, watched. I remembered the first time I met Leanne, not at a coffee shop, but in a simulation chamber. I remembered her slipping me a note, folded into the corner of a mission file. If you start to forget me, find the drawer. My heart broke all over again, because I had found it, and I had almost failed to listen. I left the factory with the duffel over my shoulder and the sun on my back. The streets were waking up. The city felt real again, noisy, imperfect, full of motion. Not staged, not paused, just alive. I didn't see the black SUV. I didn't hear the clicking in my ears anymore. No knocks, no static. The system had released me. 2 days later, I found her. Not in our apartment. Not in some safe house, but in the place we always said we'd go, That stupid little beach town with the driftwood pier and the world's worst clam chowder. She was sitting on the sand, barefoot, watching the tide roll in, hair blowing wild in the wind. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid. She looked up and smiled, not surprised to see me. I was wondering how long it would take, she said softly. I didn't say anything. I just sat beside her. We watched the water in silence. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo, the two of us, in that cabin I now remembered. Real smiles, real light, real us. They can't take it from us now, she said. No, I whispered. They can't. And I meant it. Not this time. Not ever again.